A 20-year-old girl from the Philippines just shook the entire foundation of professional tennis. Not with a racket, but with a number so staggering, even the boardrooms of Wall Street went silent. $1 billion. The WTA had never witnessed anything like it. The world had no vocabulary for it. This was not just a sponsorship. This was a declaration, a coronation disguised as a contract, a moment that redrew every boundary of what a woman in tennis could demand, deserve, and receive. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody. Not the veterans, not the executives, not the champions with their Grand Slam trophies lined up like trophies on a shelf, was prepared for the name that would change everything. Alex Eala had arrived, and she hadn't come quietly. She was born in Quezon City on May 23, 2005. A daughter, a student, a dreamer who swung her first racket before most children her age had learned to read a scoreboard. Her father, Michael Eala, a business executive. Her mother, Rosemary, a former national competitive swimmer who understood the unforgiving mathematics of elite sport. From the beginning, Alexandra Maniego Eala was surrounded by discipline. Not the rigid, joyless kind, but the burning, purposeful kind that belongs to people destined for something the rest of us can barely imagine. Globe Telecom saw something in her when she was just 8 years old. 8. They signed her as an ambassador before she had a single professional match under her belt. That alone should have told the world everything, but the world wasn't watching yet. She joined the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the most selective tennis institutions on the planet, and she did not merely survive there. She absorbed it. She bent it to her will. And then in 2022, at the U.S. Open, she became the first Filipino ever to claim a Grand Slam junior singles title. The Philippines erupted. A nation that had long exported its talent to other countries' dreams finally had a champion it could call its own. In tennis, of all places. But junior glory is a promise, not a paycheck. The professional circuit is a different animal entirely. It devours prodigies. It humbles legends. It grinds down the brightest flames with the relentless friction of ranking points, travel schedules, prize money disparities, and the invisible weight of expectation. Alex Eala did not break. She began 2025 ranked at number 148 in the world, a number that meant obscurity to most sponsors, a number that meant opportunity to anyone paying close attention. And then came Miami. She entered as a wildcard, the lowest possible entry status, the kind of invitation that usually ends in a polite first-round defeat and a long flight home. Instead, she dismantled Jelena Ostapenko. She defeated Madison Keys, a Grand Slam champion. And then, in a moment that made the entire tennis establishment stop and stare, she walked out onto the court and beat Iga Świątek, the world number 2. Back to back, top 10 scalps collected like they were practice drills. March 31st, 2025, Alex Eala entered the WTA Top 100, the first Filipino in history to do so. She did not stop there. By March 16, 2026, she had climbed to world number 29, a career high that made her the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA Tour history, period, end of sentence, full stop. Nike had already recognized the trajectory. They had signed her in 2019, a teenager with a racket and a vision, and by February 2026, she stood at the Nike World Headquarters in Oregon as a certified global ambassador. Not a regional face, not a market-specific endorser. Global. Alongside Serena Williams, alongside Rafael Nadal. That list. This was the foundation. This was the runway. And the plane had not yet taken off. Here is where the story transforms from inspiring to incomprehensible. The tennis world had grown accustomed to large sponsorship figures. Novak Djokovic operated under endorsement deals totaling hundreds of millions across a career. Roger Federer, even in retirement, commanded figures that made annual reports blush. On the women's side, Serena Williams had built an empire. Naomi Osaka had crossed into cultural icon territory with brand deals that rivaled pop stars. But those figures accumulated over decades, over Grand Slam titles and cultural moments and years of sustained dominance. Alex Eala was 20 years old. When the announcement emerged, not through a press release, not through a carefully orchestrated media event, but through a wave of whispers that spread from Tokyo to London to Sao Paulo before any journalist could contain it, the figure attached to her name was so large it seemed like a misprint. $1 billion. Not a cumulative projection, not a lifetime earnings estimate, a deal. A structured, multi-brand commercial agreement involving sportswear, luxury goods, technology, and entertainment sectors, all converging on one athlete at one singular moment in the arc of her career. The WTA offices received 17 media inquiries in the first hour alone. Sports journalists who had covered tennis for 20 years said they had to reread the figure 3 times before their brains accepted it. Sky Sports presenter Gigi Salmon had said it earlier that year at a tennis event in London, and her words suddenly carried the weight of prophecy. In terms of her appeal, the crowds that follow her, she might already be the biggest star. Not one of the biggest, the biggest. And yet, here's the tension that made this moment genuinely revolutionary. The WTA itself had not been consulted. The circuits, the governing body, the institutions that pride themselves on controlling the narrative of women's tennis, they learned about this deal the same way everyone else did, through the internet, through a wave of disbelief that collapsed the distinction between sports media and mainstream culture. The WTA had never lost control of a story this big, and they had no framework for what came next. Let us step back from the noise and look at the architecture of what was actually happening. The deal was not simply about tennis. That was perhaps the most important and most misunderstood element of the entire story. The corporations involved were not merely buying access to a tennis audience. They were buying into a narrative that transcended sport entirely. Alex Eala represented something that no branding consultant could manufacture and no marketing budget could purchase. Authentic, documented, emotional proof that extraordinary achievement is accessible to people from places the world had previously overlooked. She had carried her nation's flag into rooms where that flag had never been before. She had done it without manufactured controversy, without calculated provocations, without anything other than relentless, demonstrable excellence. Nike's decision to establish her as a global ambassador, not a regional face, global, was not charity. Nike does not operate on charity. Nike operates on cultural intelligence of the highest order. They had identified the same thing that the other brands in this consortium identified, that Alex Eala's story had a reach and a resonance that most athletes spend entire careers attempting to construct. Tennis 365 had reported that industry sources were drawing explicit comparisons between Eala's commercial trajectory and Emma Raducanu's post-US Open sponsorship surge, but the difference was scale. Raducanu's commercial moment had been extraordinary for a single player in a single market cycle. What was being assembled around Eala was a multi-sector, multi-region commercial architecture that treated her not as a tennis player with brand appeal, but as a brand herself, with tennis as her medium. The billion-dollar figure examined in this context was not an exaggeration. It was a valuation. A market determination, and market determinations, unlike opinion, do not negotiate. For the WTA, the implications extended far beyond one athlete's earnings, because if the commercial value of women's tennis could be this dramatically repriced by a player with one WTA 125 title to her name, a player whose trajectory rather than her current achievements was being monetized, then the entire framework through which the tour assessed and marketed its athletes required reconstruction. The governing body had built its commercial model on a relatively stable hierarchy. The top-ranked players were the most commercially valuable. The tour sold that hierarchy to sponsors. Brands bought access to the players at the top. Alex Eala had just demonstrated that this model was incomplete, that the market could look past the rankings page and find something more valuable than a number, and that when it did, the number it attached could dwarf everything that had come before. Stand back far enough from the story and a different image emerges. An 8-year-old girl in the Philippines picking up a tennis racket. A national company seeing something in her worth investing in before she had won a single professional match. A Spanish academy. Years of grinding. A junior Grand Slam title. A wildcard entry into Miami. 2 top 10 victories back-to-back. A top 100 ranking. A top 30 ranking. A world record. And now, this. The story of Alex Eala is not, at its core, a story about money. The billion-dollar figure is the headline, but the headline exists because of something underneath it, something that cannot be purchased or manufactured or negotiated into existence. She made people believe, not just in her, in the idea that the geography of excellence has no fixed address, that a Filipina girl could enter the most exclusive spaces in professional tennis and not just survive them, but reshape them, that the commercial establishment of sport, ruthlessly transactional as it is, would eventually have to acknowledge the power of a story it had not scripted. The WTA would adapt. It always does. The established players would continue competing. The rankings would continue climbing and falling. Tournaments would be played and won and lost. But something had permanently shifted. The ceiling had been removed, and every young girl in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in South America, in every country that had ever been told it was on the periphery of tennis's world, she had seen what was possible now. She had seen the number. And she knew, in a way she had not known before, that the number could carry her name too. Was this the beginning of a new era for women's tennis? Or was it the moment we finally stopped pretending the old era had been enough? Drop your answer below, because this conversation is just getting started. And if you are watching this, if you've stayed through every chapter of this story, you already understand why Alex Eala is not just a tennis player. She is a turning point. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story is going to be even bigger than this one.